little wild things. Yeah.
Oh, I got the right color, but yes,
Right?
it'd be nice to have the steamboat. Colleen sort of talked me into applying for advisory committee, so.
Thank you. Awesome. You got my committee.
Well, you guys have to pick that.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying there.
So I'll do my thanks to Manny in 22nd, because on that part, so, you know, other than should be accepted. I'm glad you wrote this, Bill. It means the same thing.
That's awesome.
Got to do two things after all of this.
No, I think that's great. Thanks, Charlie.
Yeah.
If the point is made, even though you was written
I made the news? Oh, yeah. Where? I don't do Facebook. On Oil City.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, I saw the Oil City article, yeah.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
I didn't see anything.
The first email I got was from a guy who said, "You're the worst member of the city council in the history of history. That's a lot. And I'm here, that makes it bad. But I was the worst.
I turned it off for like 6 weeks. Probably not gonna fall. And I turned it on every day. I'm just like, wasn't that a good idea?
I can understand you.
Good work. I just see it, you say you can be grandfathered, then you say you can't.
Not a good thing.
Right.
Ready? Okay. Okay, we'll get started. A few minutes late tonight, but we'll get started. First of all, Councilman Huber will not be here tonight. I want to read a statement here real quick. Richard Dick Shamley was a longtime servant to the Casper community. Dick passed away on Sunday, surrounded by his loving family and friends. He served on the Casper City Council from 1985 to 1990, and as mayor of Casper in 1989. His vocation as a professional CPA benefited his service to the council, as he provided astute analysis of the city's financial position as it struggled to come out of the bust of the 1980s. Dick was passionate about staying involved in the community he loved, most recently serving on the board of directors of the Casper Senior Center. He joined the Rotarian Club of Casper in 1988 and remained a dedicated Rotarian until his passing. Dick participated in the Platte River Revival each September, working alongside hundreds of volunteers to keep our river clean. Our city has lost a true advocate, so please join me in a moment of silence to honor the memory of Dick Shamley. Okay, thank you. And I'd also like to point out before we start that we have a member of our Casper Youth Council, our Vice Chair, Bryce, is here tonight. So just want to point that out. So we get started with council meeting follow-up from last week. Mr. City Manager, do we have anything?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have really anything to follow up with tonight.
Okay, anybody else from last week? Okay, so we'll move on to massage therapy with continued discussion. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, Councilman Cathy and Councilman Huber have been working pretty dutifully with the massage therapy community, if you will, in terms of putting together some ideas for council to consider. The attorney's office and the clerk's office have been great assistance in that regard as well, and indeed have a proposal for you to consider and potentially move forward for formal consideration if it be the will of the council. There's been a bunch of feedback, a bunch of discussion with the massage community, and I feel like the work has been just real upstanding and thorough. So with that, Mr. Mayor, if it pleases the council, I'd like to defer to either Councilman Cathy or Mr. Henley, whomever would like to continue from here and see what kind of direction we should get from council.
And I will defer to Councilman Huber. Oh, wait a minute. I tried.
No wonder he didn't show up.
Exactly. Basically, we have had, I believe all of you got a copy of the ordinance in your, over the weekend. It should have come out Friday. It was not a part of the packet, but I hope you have all looked through it and reviewed it. I just got done with a meeting with the committee at 4 o'clock there, and they wanted to play a few semantic games, and I said that basically other than and except for were the same thing, and I wasn't going to run the city attorney's office through another change for that. But basically, the only things that they were concerned about was on page 4, the top of the page under item C, the massagists, the masseuses, and the masseurs, and really, if that needed to stay in there. And then they were concerned about the and or under the grandfathering part, clear back at the very end of it, on page 8, under D1, and it was decided that that needed to stay in for other reasons rather than going to or. And other than that, they were, there was one that doesn't want the ordinance, and we requested they come and protested at the public hearing, but that wasn't the reason for the committee, that the committee was there to develop an ordinance and not debate the merits of whether there should be an ordinance or not. So that's kind of where we are. The police chief is happy with this. The city manager was happy with this, and yeah, that's where we are.
So I'd like to ask a question. So as far as masseuse, masseur, is there a reason why? I think there was that discussion earlier that, but did they give a reason why they don't want those in there? And
they felt that some of those terms weren't being used, and those were kind of archaic. They had never heard of the massage, the first one of those three. I'm right at the top of page 4, Mr. Henley, under C, right at the very end of C, under massage therapist. And I believe Heather has that, and it was questioned about removing those three terms there.
would they all mean the same, Mr. Henley, if it was under massage therapist, or do we have to have those in there?
You don't have to have them in there, but the concern is, from our perspective as a prosecutor, that you now say, well, I'm just a massage person. I'm just a masseur. I'm just a masseuse. I'm not a massage therapist. He wrote this for those people.
Okay.
So this was all about basically law enforcement. We're just trying to expand it. If someone is violating this, they want to get around it, why give them an easy argument? I don't know that it would prevail before the judge, but it's certainly an argument that could be made. And so for that reason, we wanted to expand it so that you can't put out any of those terms that you would usually use for kind of the people who are, just not familiar with massage therapy. I mean, it's kind of, I think, a little bit more recent development to have these folks be a specified a profession called massage therapist with all of the education and the requirements. And that's great for them, but I'm afraid that their profession could be encroached upon and maybe demeaned by people who would come in and fraudulently say, well, I'm a massage practitioner myself. And then they're off and doing their thing, and it wouldn't really comply with the standards and the professional knowledge that these people, I think, have and want to project and make sure that they are recognized for having that baseline knowledge and proficiency. So that's why we put it in there. It was really more of a protection both for them as well as the ability to prosecute somebody who would come in and not be compliant with the requirements that they had set for themselves.
And I think they would have probably accepted that if I would have had that particular explanation. But I didn't have my Rosetta Stone to get from English to legalese and all of behind it. So,
Okay.
yes.
And then just follow-up question. The one that, one or two that you had that did not think we needed it, did they give a reason why?
You're giving up your freedoms and on and on and on. So we will hear from them.
During the first
And
reading?
they came late to the meetings, so they weren't in it from the beginning.
Okay.
I have two questions, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Councilman Paul?
My first one is related, and John or Steve, you can answer this. Licensing statutes and ordinances seem to go in two directions. One is they license the title. In my profession, you can't call yourself a psychologist if you don't have a license. The other way is to license the practices. Would I be correct in saying that this ordinance is attempting to do both?
I would say yes, and primarily, and correct me if I'm wrong now, because this is the way I explained it to the other people. If you're a sole proprietor, you don't have to get 2 licenses. It is just one. But if you are like the beauty salons, to where maybe you have other people working for you, say in a 1099 type situation, then you have to have a business license that would cover them, along with each of them having their own individual license. Is that?
I think that's, as a practical matter, that's exactly right. From a legal perspective, and just kind of putting the legal nuance on it, we wanted to include this in the businesses affecting public health, and so therefore we did have the establishments. You have a business establishment, I have a license to operate a business here in Casper, Wyoming that affects public health. That's what the license is all about. So that part is, but then the profession is actually done by permit. So we've called it a little bit different, but the permit really goes more to the profession. The license goes more to the business entity and the fact that you're practicing an occupation here in Casper, Wyoming that may affect public health.
Yeah, thank you. My second question is, going back to how this all started and what happened in Cheyenne, many of the objections that we heard initially were, and I think appropriate, that people in the profession were feeling that they were essentially being accused and having to prove that they were not engaged in illicit practices, and resented that they were basically under suspicion by the wording of the ordinance. But it seemed as though, and we talked about this during the first discussion, that part of the intent was to give law enforcement a tool to deal with places that called themselves massage locations, but were really engaged in prostitution. And I asked this question to Steve, but let's get this on the record. Do we feel that this ordinance, even though it doesn't explicitly have all of that language in there, still accomplishes that goal and gives law enforcement the tools that that brought this all about in the first place, is the search for some tools to deal with that problem?
Basically, this has been vetted by the chief of police, and he is totally happy with this as long as there are changes made to the prostitution ordinance. And those changes we are looking at. And we will be seeing those at a different time, as I understand it. Is that correct, Mr. Henley?
That is correct. We kind of have done some preliminary work and actually have a rough first draft, which is on my desk with my hand notes for a further revision before it goes back to the police department.
And then if I may, one follow-up. So the people that were concerned about this and felt really insulted, I guess would be a good word, by the language of the original ordinance, are they now feeling more comfortable because all of that language has been removed?
They are.
Thank you.
Based on my previous meetings and things, if this committee were to show up next Tuesday, if this is when it shows up on the docket, I would say there would probably be 14 of them that would be in favor of this and probably 2 that would not. I see one of our committee members there sitting there, and she just gave me a thumbs up on that statement. So that's one of
One
those
more
things
then,
that
I'll be quick.
we can appease most of the people most of the time.
Of course. Would you predict that those who will object would simply be objecting to the whole concept of licensure, period, regardless of profession?
One of them most definitely,
Thank you.
yes.
I'm done.
And I'll just follow up to one of your or what you were saying as far as law enforcement goes. I think that when you look at illicit activities that take place in some of these establishments in town right now, by putting education requirements in place, licensing in place, identification is a big one in place. A lot of the people that are involved in that are not even from here. They're involved in human trafficking from other countries. And so I think that in itself is going to certainly assist in putting a stop to those types of businesses. So,
Thank you.
anybody else have? Oh,
And I believe when you wind up seeing the revisions to the prostitution ordinance, you will really fully understand where we were going as well, because in the past, the owner of the business has not been held responsible. The owner of the business will now be held responsible, which is one of the key issues that the chief was really interested in.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I still have some concerns about this. If we're rebuilding the prostitution ordinances to match this ordinance, I know everybody's put a lot of work into this, and I appreciate that, but I think we're trying to mix and match 2 ordinances. If we have problems with it, maybe we ought to be looking at them together. But when I look at page 8 of 10, it calls it a grandfather provision, section D. It is not really a grandfather position because you still have to have certain educational requirements, which some people in our city may not have, and legitimately so. There may be somebody that was taught by another massage parlor person to do it and do it right, and they may have been in business for 10 or 15 years. Or they may have a certificate that goes back 30 years ago. So how is our city clerk going to be put in a position to say, well, that's okay if you tell me it was 30 years ago and I don't have it anymore? I think we either have a grandfather clause or we don't. And I know the argument is that you can go back up before that in section 804-240 and you can appeal this. But I think we're overstepping that, and I understand there's arguments against replacing the word or replacing the word and in D1 with or. But I see that as a reasonable solution to doing this. Then you really have a grandfather clause. And I know there are people that have got a lot of hours in studying and so forth, but that doesn't mean I want to disallow the people that didn't go through all of that but have a lot of years of experience. So this is, and again, I appreciate everybody's efforts on this, but I think we're probably not hearing from those people that may like to do that. I think we're hearing from the quote, people that have a sheepskin to the tune of 14-1 or something like that. So I just think if you look at D1 and replace the word and with or, then it becomes a true grandfather clause. We're not trying to put people out of business. Thank you.
I agree with that, but to the extent of, I know we're not trying to put people out of business, but if you change that to or, then it goes right back to the establishments I was just talking about that have been established in the city for more than 2 to 3 years. Then it allows them. Well, if you put or.
If you put or in there, you don't have any other requirements.
Nothing else is required.
No, I'm only talking or for the first item. That or doesn't continue down below that.
Correct.
And I don't know the legalese to do that. But it's an and or statement. It's either or it's and. The first one is an or statement, and the rest of them can be and statements. That's just logic. computer logic.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
The point being is when you say and, if somebody out there, and this isn't a great example, but one of the ones that we had used was, took a series of online YouTube videos to learn how to do massage, and they've been doing it for 6 years, and they have a solid clientele and a business that they set up. Obviously, they haven't met these other ones. When you say and, that supersedes them, because the next thing says, graduated from a school of massage or massage therapy. So if you say and, then we are 110% going to cut out those people who have not gone to school. I mean, that's how it reads at least. I mean, if you say or, then it gives you the option. Did you go to school and have a paper certificate, or did you potentially learn from another person in the practice, or learn from videos, or learn from whatever it may be, just something that's a non-traditional form of, that you don't have documentation for necessarily.
If you continue on reading on that statement, it says, after you graduated from the school or credentials, which would be a license from another state, or passed an exam, and the other credentials could potentially be letters of recommendation from licensed therapists. And I used this example when we were talking about it the first time, is that I could have been an engineering tech for 15 years and never gone to school to be an engineer, but if I had the 20 years of experience, I could then wind up having the engineers that I worked for write letters of recommendation stating that he is qualified, he does have the skills, and I could get an engineering license and have no college degree.
Councilman Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The fundamental purpose of licensure is to protect the public from practices that are either harmful or ineffective. And ineffective practices prevent someone from getting good care because they're working with someone who isn't helping them because they don't know what they're doing. I may be an outlier on this, but as far as I'm concerned, just because somebody's been doing something for a long time doesn't mean they know what they're doing. And I think it disrespects the profession to suggest that someone can learn this some other way without going through an actual training program, and that they should just be allowed to continue. And I'm sorry if people lose their profession or lose their business because of that, but I think the protection of the public is a serious matter, and that's why I've supported this all along. So I'm in favor of the and.
Mr. Henley, I would have two questions of you. If, so just to clarify, on the first one, on the first sentence of D1, actively participated for at least 2 of the last 3 years in Casper, Wyoming, or practice, sorry, in Casper, Wyoming. If we change that and to or, then that's basically saying that if you practice for the last 2 to 3 years, then you meet the requirement. And if you haven't practiced the last 2 to 3 years, then the or kicks in for the rest of it, that if you passed a test, or am I reading that correctly? If we change that to an or, you could stop essentially at the end of line 1, just like every one of these practicing spas in town that are doing illegal activity. If they've been here for 2 to 3 years, there's nothing we can do about shutting them down.
Mayor, that's how I would read it. I think that's how the court would read it too.
Okay.
Sorry, I think where we got hung up is if you read the beginning paragraph of D, it's basically, what's the word, like preempting you to let you know that if they don't have the 500 hours of school, then this list starts. I think that's what we were missing as far as like putting in the or. Simply because obviously if somebody has already done the 500 hours of school, then they're not even, this entire section D doesn't even apply to them.
Right. So I think that end needs to remain in there, because if you change it to or, then we open Pandora's box. We allow people to do whatever they want to do. Also, with leaving and in there, I think if you go to the second paragraph there, you know, it's telling you that if they have a diploma or credentials or pass an exam acceptable, and there's an exam that you guys were discussing, I can't remember the name of it. Okay, so if a person's been doing massage therapy for years and they know what they're doing, it's a simple exam that they need to go take and pass that exam, and then they've met the requirements. So I guess that's my thoughts on it. I mean, it's in here that if, we're not saying you have to go to school, we're not saying you have to go and do that, but take an exam to show us you know what you're doing.
And I'll be honest, the person that will come up here that is against the whole ordinance claims that they have been practicing for 25, 30 years here in town. They have gone to no schooling. They did not want the insurance requirement in there. And yeah, so anyhow, that's what you will hear from the public. But basically, that was when we had the discussion that we weren't here to decide the merits of yea or nay, whether we were going to have an ordinance. Our committee was to design an ordinance that if council felt that there should be an ordinance, then this would be the ordinance. So that's, and the initial premise was we threw out Laramie and started from scratch.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Anything else on this, Mr. Henley or Mr. Napier?
Mr. Mayor, if it pleases the council, then I would suggest we go ahead and prepare it for formal consideration, accompanied by a public hearing, and chances are we could probably get that taken care of and ready for next Tuesday night if council's amenable.
I think we still have to establish, and again, because.
Oh, we do, don't we? Yeah. The date for the public hearing. Yeah, that's right.
Public hearing. We'll have to establish a public hearing date. We can do that next week, correct?
We could do that next week and probably have the first reading by the end of the month, I would think.
Okay.
I think I'm going to be sick.
Is everybody good with that? Councilman Powell.
I'd like to express my appreciation.
Unfortunately, the elk season will be over by then.
I'd like to express my appreciation to Councilman Cathy and Councilman Huber and all the people who took the time out of their schedules to work on this, because I think this is well done and solves many of the problems that were brought to our attention following the first effort.
A big thanks really needs to go out to city staff, to Amanda, to the city clerk's office, to Heather in the city attorney's office, and to Mr. Henley, our city attorney. They are the ones that have really taken a bunch of loose notes and suggestions and drawn it all together to come up with this. So they are the ones that need to be applauded for the hard work. And I want to commend them for that. Thank you all.
This is certainly a better version than what we had, and a lot of things that did need to be in there are gone, which is good.
I'm still alive, so you got to feel
Right?
fairly well.
Okay, so are we good moving this forward? Okay.
Thank you all.
We'll move on to Disability Council fundraiser. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, we have the opportunity to hear a proposal this evening with respect to your disability council, your advisory group on this matter, to propose a fundraiser that they would like to pursue. And with that, we have our staff representative here this evening.
Gotcha.
And so with that, Mr. Mayor, if we could postpone that conversation till later in the agenda, we should have our folks here ready to cover that. And if in fact they can't make it tonight, I would ask for your continuation of this topic to another agenda, and we'll be better prepared. But otherwise, if we could move on to downtown parking.
That sounds good to me.
I saw our captain here tonight. He's ready to roll. I know that much.
Like it.
And so the purpose of this discussion tonight is really just to provide you an update as to that effort and how it's going and some of the results that we've seen and tickets that have been issued and sort of the complexity of the notion at hand. And so if I could defer the floor to our Captain Cheney for that, that'd be great.
Good.
I'm going to defer that to Lieutenant Dabney. He's the one that's in charge of our CSO program and put kind of this whole report together based off some of the information we received from all of you. So with that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. So just going to go over some finer points of the downtown parking of what we've kind of done and what we have kind of made plans for going forward. Between 8:01 and 9:30, we've taken 1,000 calls for service just from the CSO department alone. Of that, 182 are parking problems, and 129 of those were parking problems in the downtown area. And those are rough numbers. There could be one or two more or one or two less in there. Unfortunately, sometimes they pull the address of the owner, and so that kind of goes out of the area. So we're refining that as a different type of reporting. So one of the things we're trying to correct is, or make better, is how they go down there and go about that. So they walk it. They go down and write down all the plates of all the vehicles, and that's why I sent across the parking logs that they go and do. And they write down all the plates, and then they come back, and if that vehicle's there past the critical parking or overtime parking, then they will cite that vehicle accordingly. So like I said, 129 parking problems were created in the downtown area. Out of that, approximately 86 to 90 parking sites were written between 8:01 and 9:30. It picked up a little bit in September because our staff was fully trained at that point. We went through a high turnover this year, so now we have 4 full-time CSOs that are dedicated to go down there and enforce that parking. So the push to this is to go to the Brazos system, which we are looking at currently. I think we're kind of in the middle of testing that program, seeing how well it's going to work out for us, and making it so it's a lot more efficient to go down there and tag those vehicles in a little timelier fashion. So the Brazos system is kind of in the middle stages of testing. We're looking at maybe January-ish for implementation of that. It also has to marry up with the license plate recognition system. So if those two systems can marry up, it makes it even faster. So with the Brazos system, you still have to type in the plate number, but it cuts your time in about half of just logging vehicles. So if you can see on the parking logs in here that I sent across, you know, these are front and back just one day that they are going down there and doing parking. So that's a lot of handwritten time. Sometimes, you know, you want to make sure that you have everything correctly written, where that Brazos system is a little bit better system. It's going to give you a VIN number. It's going to be able to be uploadable to the courts. So that will help a lot with efficiency of the CSOs. The other benefits of the Brazos system is it's a digital application. It's not written. It automatically uploads for the courts. The courts are you know, involved in the process too. They got to know when those tickets are coming up, so it's a lot easier process. And it reduces time spent. The LPR system is a whole nother animal, kind of. We're looking at 2 right now, Vigilant and Genentech is the next one. It seems like Genentech is the one that Cheyenne is using, and they're having a little bit more success on. Vigilant is the one that is kind of iffy at this point. So that all has to marry up. Brazos has to marry up with Genentech, which has to marry up with Tyler. So there's a lot of inner working going into that, and Sergeant Bullard and Hoffman are all working on those processes. So currently what they're looking at right now is the Vigilant has a couple reading errors for Wyoming. The UW plates have a hologram system in there, and they have a hard time reading those plates. The Genentech has a 90%, 97% positive reading on plates. And again, the CSO still has to go back and confirm that VIN number, confirm that's a vehicle, make, model, all that stuff. So there is a back check with that. And then, again, marrying those systems up. So that's kind of the push forward. As far as the downtown parking, you can tell just by the logs that I sent that they spend a significant amount of time down there in those parking areas and talking to business owners and finding out what's going on, as far as what their problems are. The other document that you have in there kind of shows repeat offenders, repeat vehicle offenders that come back to the same owners. Not necessarily in the same spot. So like if you look at number 2 on there, it has 335 South David, 204 East 2nd, and then 2581 Weston, which may be the address where the car belongs to. It's just a weird pull that this system has. So again, we're working on that to make sure that those are a lot more accurate as far as citing those vehicles and repeat offenders.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, sir. I just want to compliment you guys. You put a lot of work into this, and obviously we're going to get a lot better on it when we get our new equipment. But I was a little amazed that your list of repeat offenders was as short as it is.
Yes, sir.
We get so many complaints about people parking down there every day for all day, and I think, quite honestly, statistically, I think we're covered here, at least since July through October. It looks to me like we've been down there, and we've caught up with a few of them.
Yes, sir.
So I'm really anticipating the improvements when we get newer systems, but I compliment you guys for your work.
And some of that was getting up to staff. Like I said, just in August and September, we had over 1,000 calls for service that just the CSOs did. So there's fingerprinting, VIN inspections, they take accidents, all that stuff. So, this only makes it easier so they can get to all the other duties that they have with this Brazos and LPR system.
Well, thanks for your efforts.
Councilman Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lieutenant, again, thank you for your efforts. I think it's a long time coming to get this going, and you guys are doing a great job. What does Brazos, can you give us what it's an acronym, I assume.
I think it's a company name, Brazos. I didn't think it was an acronym.
How do you spell that?
BRAZOS is the.
Zeos, okay. Would you mind just describing how that system works for the record, so that we can describe it to businesses who are going to ask about this?
So it's a handheld system. It's all digital. Once they bring it back, they upload it. It goes straight to the courts.
So they're taking a photo of the license plate?
They still have to type in the number. So the LPR will take a picture of the license plate. Brazos still has to be typed in to that. I don't believe it's a digital photo system. And again, we're still in those meetings trying to get how those systems marry up. LPR Genentech will marry a little bit better with Brazos than Vigilant does, from my understanding, with the text on the phone.
And I'm sorry, and follow up, the other system is the license plate reader, Vigilant?
The LPR, the Genentech and the Vigilant are license plate readers. We tested them years ago. I think the mayor was there and they read fence posts. As numbers, and they've really kind of refined that system in the last 4 or 5 years to where they've kind of weeded those viruses out, if you will.
And that system then will automatically say it's been more than 2 hours since we took these 2 snapshots of this license plate?
Yes, sir.
Basically, okay. Cool, thank you.
And that system also, I'm sure it's still hooked into NCIC, so if it's a stolen vehicle, it'll tell them that too. And
one of the videos that they put out on it is a highway patrol unit, and they're doing 100 miles an hour down the freeway, and they're reading every plate. So that's how they sell it, initially. But now you have somebody driving that down, the downtown area or wherever you put that, and it reads every plate as you go. So there's other applications for it just besides downtown parking. You can set it on 2nd Street, and it'll read plates, and it'll tell you if you're going to get a stolen vehicle or a BOLO vehicle that we may be looking for. So there's a lot of other applications. This is just one that we're kind of focused on to make sure it works correctly.
Deal.
Councilman Bates.
Hey, Mayor. I'm not sure if you can answer this or not, but do you know if there has been anybody that has contested having the ticket put on their window or anything of that nature that it blew away or wrong vehicle or anything?
Currently, the way we're doing it?
Yes.
Not like a specific example. I know we've had people say, well, you know, my husband was driving that vehicle, or my wife or my son, but we can only ticket the vehicle. Generally, the hard copy goes under the windshield. It's generally stays there, but, you know, I wouldn't say no. I'm sure we've had people contest tickets.
Okay, just wondering.
Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, to add to Councilman Bates, to add to the Lieutenant's comments, the feedback that I've received with regard to the sort of the sticky base by which tickets are applied has been a dramatic improvement with regard to just the placing under the windshield wiper or whatever. So I think that medium is working very well. And as near as I can tell, it's going to be our medium moving forward.
Councilman Bates.
Thank you. Has his CSOs have anything to add that could help improve it, or have they mentioned anything that could be done to be better or anything, since they're the ones that are doing it, they're the ones out there writing it and going through it? I know you're looking at the system, but is there anything more that they say, you know, this would be nice or this would help? Or
So they're pretty highly involved in this process. So the way that Sergeant Bullard has done is he kind of, even though we have some really new people and we're trying not to overwhelm them with technological information, we're bringing them in because they're the ones that are down there doing it. Right now it's foot patrol. It's walking every block face, logging every vehicle, writing it down. And so, you know, their feedback is it goes from 45 minutes to an hour to about 25 minutes with this entry in, which allows them to go out and take accidents or to go back and help out with fingerprinting or the other calls, the VIN inspections and things of that nature. You know, other parking problems around the city. Like I said, there's, you know, just in 2 months, there's 1,000+ calls. So it allows them to go out and better handle the rest of the city. So for them, it's a speed of movement, you know, a little more ease of adaptability for all the technology that continues to come into the police department.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Ready to go back to the others then? Are we done with this one?
I think so, Mr. Mayor, unless there's any other questions or items of homework, if you will, that we should follow up on, we'd be pleased to do that.
I think we're good.
Matter? Okay.
Thank you to the PD for that. And then we'll go back to the Disability Council fundraiser. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have our staff representative here to discuss the item I previously described, and so without further ado, if we could turn the time over to Ms. Lopez, that'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So I am here representing the Casper's Council for People with Disabilities. And unfortunately, Linda Jones could not be present today. She is the subcommittee chair that came up with this idea for the calendar fundraiser. She couldn't be here today, and Austin, our chair, seems to be running a little bit late. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have specific to the fundraising idea. I'm sorry I wasn't present. Sure, absolutely. I'm gonna go ahead and take this off. Okay, so the idea that the council had was to develop a calendar for 2021 with the theme of Heroes of COVID-19. Their idea is to feature photographs in the calendar of service providers throughout our community who have provided uninterrupted service during the pandemic. The thought is that we would not feature specific businesses, but more general kind of groups of people who have contributed to service provision throughout this public health emergency. Photo releases will be required for anybody who agrees to participate to have their photograph taken. Disabled persons will be featured in as many of the photographs as possible. So if people with disabilities are the service providers, they would be featured. If people with disabilities were not the service provider, the provider would be featured working with somebody with a disability. The calendar, I don't think we have one in this room. There's one in the meeting room next door. So the idea is that it would be kind of a large background collage calendar with tear-off pages for the actual calendar months. And so the collage would remain the same throughout the year, but the months would feature specific dates that provide service or recognition to dates that honor disabilities. So the Americans with Disability Act enactment date, dates that feature mental health awareness days, things like that. The proposal right now is that we would try to minimize costs as much as possible by developing at least the calendar tear-off pages in-house. But we would like to have the collage portion, the photo portion of the calendar done professionally so that it looks nice. As far as sales and distribution, right now the proposal is that we would make 100 calendars to start. We believe that we can make the calendars for about $5 or less each, and then we would sell them for approximately $10 a piece. And the council would like to solicit local businesses to sell calendars, such as convenience stores, local restaurants, and we do have a Facebook page dedicated to this council, so we would promote the sale of the calendars on the Facebook page as well. And then they identified the possible uses of the funds that are raised as conferences and education for council members on ADA and advocacy topics. So members of our actual disability council could participate in education that helps them to advocate more for people in their community. Or we could also sponsor recreational opportunities for the disabled. So kind of in the essence of Make-A-Wish, somebody would submit an application that says, I would really like to do this recreational activity, and then we would provide funds and help coordinate that activity to be done. Applications would be reviewed and awarded by the council. And the last idea is to provide vouchers and or tokens for transportation for disabled people throughout the community. And that could be, through CATSI or the bus, taxi companies, etc. So those were some of the ideas that they had. And I am happy to answer any questions that I can.
Okay. Any council questions? Councilman Cathy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is this council, they've gone ahead and filed paperwork and everything to become a 503C, haven't they?
No, sir, we have not.
Okay. Because I was trying to figure out why you were needing to come to council for approval to raise funds. And that was where I was going. I have no issue with what you're wanting to do, but I was just curious as to why they needed to come here. And maybe that's a better question for Mr. Napier.
Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cathy, it's a good question. And one of the things that maybe I could have Ms. Lopez address is what the need for the funds are. But the fact is, given that this group acts to some regard on your behalf, and certainly with respect to being designated, if you will, as sort of a City of Casper organization, we certainly wanted you to be aware of what the activities were, particularly as it relates to potentially raising funds in a quasi way under the city's name. And so that's why we thought it'd be helpful for you to be aware of that and have that report. Certainly looking at the possibility of becoming a 501c3 may be something the group might want to consider for the future. But Mr. Mayor, if I may, Zulema, do you mind talking about what the use of the dollars raised could potentially be?
Well, she had mentioned that in her presentation, so I
Okay.
got that, and that was fine. The other reason I was asking about the 503C is that if they're going to continue to want to raise funds, then that winds up, for those that itemize, becomes a charitable donation. Sure. So that was the other reason I was wondering that. But otherwise, yeah, I've got no argument with it or whatever, just.
Mr. Mayor, I think too, if I may, I do believe that folks who donate to the city of Casper or a group acting on behalf of the city of Casper can still receive a charitable donation write-off, even though it may have different implications depending on the charitable donation and so on. So a lot of opportunity for this group and certainly for those who want to participate, I think.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Seem on a completely different subject since you're here. Will we be hearing from the council at some point regarding the results obtained from the transportation study that was done through the water bills?
Thank you, Councilwoman Powell. Yes, so the intention, we reviewed the results of that survey as a group at the last regular business meeting. The intention is for the subcommittee to come together, review those results even further, identify some recommendations that we have moving forward as far as how we can improve transportation access for people with disabilities, and then we would bring any proposal that we would like to move forward with to City Council for consideration.
Just wanted to alert council to the fact that that work was underway. And
they are very excited for that work.
Councilman Hopkins.
It's a hardworking group, folks, just so you know.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Along the same lines that Councilman Kathy mentioned, if you guys would choose to become a 501c3, then you could also be qualified for what's called a qualified charitable distribution, and that is tax-free to me if I make one to you. It's not a deduction, it's tax-free. That can be a significant amount of money. The problem is you only have to be 72 years old to do this. But the bottom line is, that would be another method or another reason for you guys to look at your own 501c3, because I don't think you can do that giving money to the city. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. So do you need direction from us, Carter, on that? I don't think so. Okay.
Well, 74.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda review. Do we want to start with this, Carter? Okay, so there's a note on there that is my proposed item. If you guys remember a week ago, one of the last meetings, I talked about reviewing contracts, and what brought that all to light is there's a couple contracts right now that the city is involved with contractors that it seems like we've surpassed the time frame when they're supposed to be done. And so I had the question as far as how we handle those as far as liquidated damages, when those kick in, and do we have those kick in. But I think to be fair, to be able to have a good discussion about this, it would only be fair to staff to give them time to put together a presentation to explain to us exactly how the process works with contracts, and when we get to a certain point in time that that you should have substantial completion upon the project, and then final completion of the project, when those liquidated damages would kick in and how that would go about. And there's other things like seasonal shutdowns and whatnot, and how the extensions work. So I had questions on two projects. One was the Platte River Revival Project. The other was the ice arena. Because we are losing revenue on the ice arena as we speak. But to be fair to everybody on that, I think it's we need to have Andrew and Mr. Cortez and a few people be able to come in here and give us a presentation on where we're at, and then if we have questions, obviously we have questions, they'd be able to answer them for us. So Councilman Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a follow-up along those same lines in reviewing contracts, several councils ago, it was brought up, the state has a list of qualified bidders that they use for state contracts, like on roads and bridges and things like that. And it was brought up that we maybe should try to do that for some of our contracts for those types of services, to where we don't get into, and basically at the end of each contract, you wind up doing an evaluation of that contract, i.e., were they late, were they early, did they upset the neighbors, this type of a thing. And if you wind up with then contractors, excuse me, sinus drainage from the people trying to fix my ears. But yeah, this has been going on for 2 years. But anyhow, basically you start evaluating your contractors, and even though George may come in low bid, by the time he gets liquidated damages, he has torqued off half of the neighborhood, that he is not really a responsible contractor, and that maybe he should be moved down the list. And that's kind of the way, from what I had understood, the state does some of those things, but there was some severe opposition to that proposal by a particular council member at that time. And I was wondering if that's something that maybe we should consider and bring up along with what you're talking about here.
So I think that's part of our conversation, because we had talked earlier today about contractors that have paid liquidated damages on multiple occasions. And even though they're the lowest bidder, if they continue to come in and they're, you know, some of these you wonder why they, or how they're still in business, because of the amount that they're paying back. So I think that's part of the discussion, or certainly should be part of the discussion too. Well, and of course, the legal side of things on what we can and can't do.
How well their projects hold up. You know, if you go out and put in a new concrete street, figuring a 10-year life, and you're out there in 5 years replacing the concrete, then we have issues as well, because even though they were low bid, they didn't really save the taxpayers any money. So that would also play into it, is that you need to look at how their projects hold up. But anyhow, that was something, since you brought this up, it was something I was ultimately probably going to ask about. But yeah, this to me ties right in with it. So,
well,
way to go, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, well, we're trying to get some answers back. I had a person out of Ward 2 call me and vented to me basically, and didn't want to tell me who they were, but they were upset over the park not being done out there. And clearly, I went out there, and clearly it wasn't going to be done on time. And so they had a legitimate complaint. And so that's kind of what got us started, the ball rolling on this. But to be fair and do this properly, I think it's just, let's let staff give us a presentation on what's happened and take it from there. Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It might also be good to include the conversations that we've had on council over the years regarding change orders. That's kind of a different animal. Most of the time when a change order comes to us, it could be volumes that were miscalculated on our part or their part. It could be just engineering changes to make it a cheaper project or a more responsible project, if you will. Or there can be other issues that come up, and I see those as a little bit different than somebody who's just routinely late. So, thank you.
Okay, anything else on that topic in particular? I guess to segue out of that, we're having a discussion at pre-meeting that if we could add to an agenda item for a staff member to, from the building department to come in. We feel it's kind of important that, you know, citizens go and make repairs on houses, but I don't think people really realize when they need to have a building permit or when they don't need to have a building permit. And this was an issue that came up here a few weeks ago with someone in town that whether or not they'd pulled a building permit or not. And so I think the general feeling is a lot of people may go buy windows off the shelf at Menards and go home and replace them, but the reality behind it is, can they do that or can't they? and do they need a building permit? So maybe if more of a presentation and knowledge for the general public as to knowing when you're required, when you're not required to have one, so.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Kathy.
Something that we could have the presentation here, which I think is a good idea, but could we wind up with some type of a checklist that we would put in city billing when the water bill goes out? Or, yeah, that way you have a list sitting there in front of you, because the homeowners are going to have them.
Right.
You don't have a home without a water bill.
Right. Well, and I guess to clarify, this is not like, we're not looking at a new ordinance, nothing like that. We're just simply, this is information only. And we had, in our pre-meeting, had a discussion that even maybe going to the point if there's something that we could provide to the hardware stores, so whether it's Home Depot or Menards or Sutherland's or Blodorn's or Ace or whoever, to give them some sort of a checklist that people can come in and say, you know, the question, do I need a building permit, or you need a building permit when, or you need an electrical permit when, just to provide those information so that the public has it and they know, and there's no question whether they do or don't need it, so. Vice Mayor Lutz.
And just a point of clarification, because I think that sometimes with things like this, we kind of lose sight and we just see it as, oh, well, the city just wants me to get a permit for everything I do. That's not the point behind this. The point behind this is to ensure that the work that's being done on your home is ensuring that you have safe and livable conditions. So the whole reason of having an electrical permit would be that somebody who is certified and knowledgeable in electricity would come and check that electrical work after the job was completed and make sure that it was completed properly. And so it's a huge public safety factor versus, you know, just a simple making people come and fill out permits because it's a pain in the butt. It's way more about public safety.
Councilman Kevin.
And along following those lines, it may not specifically be for that particular homeowner. If he wants to burn his house down, that's fine. But basically, it's to protect the next owner of that house as well, to ensure that it is up to code and things were done appropriately. And that's the other side of it that people need to understand as well.
Okay, anything else on agenda review? Anything anybody needs to add to a work session, or? No.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, would it be appropriate to request your indulgence to visit with our chairman, who did arrive here? And if you had any questions to entertain of that individual from our Disabilities Council, that individual is here and would be pleased to take some time with you if that indulgence could be granted.
Okay. If he is,
Thank you.
to add to it, absolutely.
I'm good. How are you? Absolutely, sure. So I'm Austin Berlin. I'm the chair of the Casper's Council of People with Disabilities. I understand that the proposal has already been made today, but I just want to thank you for hearing that proposal. And if you have any questions at all for me going forward, I'm here anytime, so.
Okay, I think we're good with moving forward with the proposal, but I'll ask council if anybody has any questions or comments. Councilman Powell.
Just as the council rep, Austin, is there anything else we can do to help you with your work? And do you feel like the council is functioning well and getting some business done?
I do think that we're on a really good track, doing some work on the transportation survey, which I heard that is going to be presented on here soon as well. And just trying to move forward with COVID-19, even though that's been a little difficult. But I think that we're still all here and all committed to the purpose and ready to help you guys any way we can. So.
Thank you.
Thank you much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and I think we're past agenda review unless somebody else had any. Councilman Bates.
I do. I've been waiting for a reply on this before I brought it up, and I haven't heard back yet. But I had a person reach out to me that says basically a builder issue relates to ordinance in which vertical metal siding is strictly prohibited. And so I'm just wondering if that is something that we can, so they're wanting to look at changing that ordinance to where vertical siding can be done because from the sounds of it, it's prohibited. I don't know anything more than that there. So I'm just hoping we can put that on an agenda, find out more regarding it, and possibly look into that.
I don't know that it necessarily would need to make it to an agenda item myself, but I think what they're talking about is vertical metal is allowed on commercial buildings, but not on residential buildings in some neighborhoods. And therefore, they're asking if that can be changed so that you can have vertical metal on residential housing. That has come up quite a few times with people asking. So I don't know, maybe that's a question that Dan Elston can just give us an answer as to why they can't have it, or if there's a change that could be made, then maybe we can bring that forward to a work session. But I know that that's what the issue is that you can only do it on commercial, you cannot do it on residential.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates, we'd be happy to provide a response, and as a matter of fact, we could probably get that response in your info packets this week. And if council would like further discussion, just let us know and we'll be prepared. Does that work?
That work? All right.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the legislative review. Mr. City Manager, you have anything on that?
Mr. Mayor, I don't have anything this evening. However, we will ask for your indulgence to potentially have another discussion on legislative review, in that the WHAM priorities are being prepared now, and we'd like you to have that in front of you, and then of course potentially weigh in with regard to other items that we may not have brought in front of you prior, if that's okay.
Okay, then we'll go to council around the table. Councilman Cathy.
Basically, you heard what I've been doing lately at the earlier discussion, so that's all I've got. Been basically working with the massage ordinance.
Okay, Councilman Hopkins.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Councilman Johnson.
Nothing tonight.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Needless to say, I received some feedback on my remarks last week about the importance of wearing masks. The vast majority of it was positive, people saying somebody needed to say something about this. Since then, if you happen to read the paper today, if I'm reading it correctly, the number of positive cases in the state of Wyoming has quadrupled in the last month. And I'd like you all to imagine how we would respond if we saw a quadrupling of domestic violence incidents, or we saw a quadrupling of DUIs, or we saw a quadrupling of any other concern that we have about the health and safety of our community, I think we would all be very serious about it, very upset about it, and we would all be talking about it. Unfortunately, we, along with everyone else, have just become desensitized to this problem. And I really think we are doing so at our peril. And so if this trend continues, because when something quadruples, it doesn't stop there, it tends to continue to get worse. I hope that's not the case. I'd really like to stop talking about it. But I think we are doing the community a real disservice when we close our eyes to this. Now, for myself, I have taken the position now that I will attend no meetings unless masks are mandatory at that meeting or there is social distancing in place. I will attend no public gatherings or entertainment unless that is the case. I don't want to do that to punish people, but it's a safety issue for myself and for other people. And I would encourage all of you to adopt the same stance. We are leaders in this community. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of angst about how do we handle all of this. And people look to people in leadership positions to provide guidance. That is part of our job. And I would encourage you all to adopt a similar stance. If more and more people do that, then we will gradually see businesses enforce their mask mandates. Right now they can't because they're the negative impact on their business. But if more and more people say, I'm not going if it's not safe, gradually the pressures will change and people will start doing this, and then we'll defeat this thing. Because that's the only way we're going to defeat it, is by starving it of hosts. So, sorry to be the Debbie Downer on this, but we got a real serious situation on our hands, locally and nationally, and unfortunately we have far too many people listening to voices that are giving them bad advice. So I hope we can all step up as a group and really make this message that we need to have people care about each other around here. Thank you.
Councilman Bates.
The two things. One, the historical preservation did not meet Monday because of Independence Day. They moved it to the 19th. And the health department board meeting scheduled for Thursday will not be taking place. And the next one won't be until the following month, so I won't be at as well. So that's the only two things I have.
Councilman Pacheco.
Nothing today, thank you.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
Nothing today.
All right. Just a couple things I have. I did the opening ceremony for Special Olympics this last week, and law enforcement did their torch run there. Unfortunately, it couldn't be a great turnout because some people couldn't travel, but it was still an awesome event. It was great to get out there and talk. It was myself, Commissioner Kaufman, and Senator Barrasso that were there. Went to the PBR twice this weekend. A good turnout on Saturday night. A lot of people up there, so good to see things are somewhat getting back to normal. And the only other thing I would add, just to go back to the agenda items, because I noticed it wasn't on there, can we, for future agenda items, 2021, could we add that strategic plan for the city for 20 or 30 years down the road where we'd like to see ourselves going to? And that's all I have for tonight. So if there's nothing else, we will be adjourned. Thank you.